point in time, they said, well, who built this stuff? And they said the giants. And when the Spanish got there, they didn't understand how they lost all of the technology to build these walls and had no understanding of how to build these walls, even though they had only built them, quote unquote, 50 years before. And it's
Yes.
like, well, maybe it's because they didn't build them and it wasn't their technology. And maybe them saying they didn't build them, they should listen. But they don't want to, they want to just put words in people's mouths to make it work for them.
Yes. And on that note, we're late for our break, but I was not going to
Oops.
interrupt that train of thought because that was fascinating. So this is a little 2-minute break, and we'll be back on the flip side.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And we are back. You're listening to Paranormal Experience Radio. I am your host, Kat Hobson, and I am joined by Dr. Tina Louise, and we are having a great time. So I am just having a ball having this discussion. You are so informative.
Thank you.
And it just...
I'm sorry, you called me Tina, and Tina Louise was on Gilligan's Island, so it just made me laugh.
did I really? I am so sorry.
You did. You're not the first.
Freudian slip. I apologize. Dr. Rita Louise. And, during the break, we were talking about the work that had to have gone into creating these blocks. I've heard all kinds of theorists expound on this from, well, they just melted the block and then, they softened it, they put a substance around it and used that to cut it. Well, there's no records of that, and I haven't seen it anywhere else that I'm aware of. And my husband is a machinist, and he is an excellent manual machinist, and it blows him away. And you had referred me for him to Christopher Dunn, who is also a machinist who has investigated these. So it's just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to give a reasonable answer, which is somebody machined those babies and they held tight tolerances and they were able to build that.
Well, and I think, so if you look at the mythic record, it suggests that there was a race of beings on the earth prior to the advent of humanity, and it was a race of giants,
Yes.
the Earthborn in Greek mythology. And you ask some cultures, like we were talking about on the break, that Sacsayhuaman site, if you ask the indigenous people back in the day who built it, they said the giants. So that response is consistent with the storyline and their loss of the technological expertise. But the same thing with like the pyramids. They were built using a level of technology that it seems predates the more current Egyptians, the Egyptians that, came to rise about 2500 BC.
I heard an interesting piece of information at a conference I attended recently relevant to that, and that was that they had found a papyrus that was kind of a diary, a journal of someone who is thought to have been a construction manager type person and on the building pyramids project. And he describes how they did that, like getting them in from the Nile and stuff. And I was just like, there is no way. Really? I have heard nothing else about it except that from an Egyptologist at AlienCon in June. So, have you heard anything of that nature?
I have not heard that. I've had a couple of other people make a statement similar. I haven't heard about the papyrus, but I did hear one theory that kind of actually made sense to me, even though some people will come up with theories. Like I came up with a theory about why Göbekli Tepe was buried, and it was poo-pooed, even though there are some people, when I share it with, they're like, that makes total sense. And so somebody shared a theory about the building of the pyramids, because they're attested to being built by Khufu. And his comment was, because supposedly he built them in 20 years, or the Grand Pyramid was built in 20 years, which I don't even know how they could possibly do that. With the speed that they would have to cut and move and install stone, I don't see how they could do that.
Well, that's what this Egyptologist was so upset about, because the general consensus was that it took them 40-something years, and this papyrus said that it took 27. So they are so upset because they were less than half the time that they felt like it would have taken. And I thought, well, maybe it's wrong. Well, that's a lot of work to do in that time frame.
But what he suggested was that the pyramids existed during I can't say his name tonight.
That's okay.
Khufu's reign. And what he did was that he re-encased the pyramid in limestone. So he just put the limestone blocks on the outside of an existing structure. Now that you could do in 20 years and do pretty quick. Now, most of those blocks are missing again. But have you ever noticed, like if you look at pictures of the three pyramids, the amount of erosion in that stone? I mean, granted, it's sandstone, but there's a lot of erosion in it. Now, yes. Robert Schoch has looked at the erosion of the Sphinx, but no one's looked at the erosion on the pyramids. And how long would it take, and what kind of weather conditions would you need to have that stone be wore out the way that it is? But no one looks at it. Even though, not that I'm a geologist and would know anything, but I would look at it.
I could see that. That would be a logical step.
But I think resurfacing it and then kind of taking ownership, like, hey, yeah, I did the pyramids, would make a lot of sense, especially with the mentality that the Egyptians seem to have. They would scratch out somebody's name off of one monument and put their name on top, that was just kind of common practice back then. And so I could see, because those pyramids are identified with being some of the earliest building in that area. So basically the way that they want the timeline to read is, about 4,500 BC, we somehow, miraculously, came up with writing, got the wheel, figured out astronomy, came up with the whole legal system, did all of these things in Sumeria, and then not much after that, we started doing the same thing in Egypt, but then we started building these massive buildings in a construction project that we can't figure out even today how they did it, and would never be able to replicate it.
No. But nothing to see here, folks.
Yeah, nothing to see here. And then in South America, they don't even try to touch it. They just don't even go there. It's like, yeah. Oh, yeah, that stuff.
It's like in Thailand as well. There's so many of these ancient holy sites all over the globe. You have, nobody even talks about the stuff in Tibet because maybe it's because it would be all destroyed if the narrative went that way right now. But it is just amazing to me that nobody seems to know that these things are all global.
Mm-hmm.
It's just ignored. Well, for the most part.
For the most part. So in addition to my books, I also have a couple of videos, and one of them is called Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, which is available on Amazon.com for $1.99. So it's cheap. Can't even get a Starbucks for that price. And it looks at like architecture, and levels of craftsmanship to maybe be a signature of who the architect was. Because different architects construct in different styles. And if you look around the globe, you find that megalithic, pieces fit together construction in different sites around the world. But why would, why? That just doesn't even make sense. And they look very similar. How they're done, it looks very similar. But then as you move forward in time, it's like the craftsmanship goes away.
It does.
And so it looks at art and architecture and, like most of my work, it asks a lot of questions and makes you really think about, well, this is what we have and look at these parallels and similarities and, but it's really visual. I had to make it as a video because there was no way to pull it together in a text format. So it's really interesting, and it has a great soundtrack.
I love a great soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm looking at the clock, so I'll just make this quick. So, I had finished the video, and this guy, Chris, did the music for me, and I was testing it out. I burned a DVD, and I put it into my DVD player in the living room, and, I was doing something, and I don't know, somehow it got turned on, and I'm kind of in the kitchen and I hear this thing and I'm kind of listening to it and the music in the background. I'm like, hey, that video sounds pretty interesting. And I go in the other room and it was mine.
How awesome is that?
Mm-hmm. It was really cool.
You blew your own self out of the water.
I did.
That's cool. Well, when you were putting that together, is it not difficult to, I know you said that it couldn't be done in text, but it just seems there's so much information, and I do know that we've only got about 30 seconds left, but it just seems like that would be a difficult thing to even do in a video, to pull things together visually. I guess visual is the only way you could do that, though.
Mm-hmm. And I just took some very finite, because one of my big points is really putting out that there's a global narrative, and there is this core that makes us be human. And so this was just another aspect of looking at this global comparison of things.
Right. Well, I find it fascinating. So far, there's nothing of yours that I've touched that I wasn't just drawn into. So
thank you.
That's pretty telling about how much research and information you put into that. But We are up at our top of the hour news break. We'll be back in 5. This is a great time to do your cartwheels, stretch your legs, take the